Alrighty. So thanks everybody for tuning into this episode. Today we have Tony Woods, who's the founder and executive director of Public Equity. Tony, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh man, I appreciate you for having me.
All right. So we always love to start with missions of the organizations we're interviewing. So what is a mission of Public Equity?
So our mission at Public Equity is to improve public health, public safety, and to advocate for equitable distribution of resources in the most vulnerable communities.
All right. We'll get into all of those details, but before we do, why you, Tony? Why is this an organization that you founded and are the executive director of and are putting all your passions towards?
I've been asking myself that for a while, right? But no, I honestly believe that sometimes certain things find you in life. My journey on the path of socially responsible work kind of I can't even really I don't even really know where it started. I know one thing that really prompted me to really want to do this work was the death of a young man, Darian Albert, who was a student at Finger High School. He was murdered. The video went viral, and it was kind of like a sign of things to come. Because I think for me, I just kind of saw that we were starting to be kind of become desensitized to like people dying right in front of us. But in addition to that, I grew up in a community where I saw a lot of violence. So I think all of those things were kind of like the recipe that kind of prompted me to want to get involved and do this work.
Okay. Awesome. So I think one of the probably common questions that you might get right off the way is equity as a part of your name of your organization. How does Public Equity define equity? Because I know there's a lot of definitions out there and comparisons of equity versus equality. So I'd love to hear your opinion and why that was a part of the core title of your organization.
Yeah. For me, equity just simply means fairness, right? So being a black person or a person of color in America, we kind of are already at a disadvantage. So for me, instead of having equality, we need not a head start, but we need to be caught up first before we can even can compete, if that makes sense. So that's why we came up with the term public equity, because it essentially means just access or fair and reasonable access for everybody.
Yeah. Um, so the history and the origins of Public Equity, what were some of those initial, because you mentioned a lot of different aspects of your organization, what were some of the initial programs or conversations or equitable uh, aspects were you trying to fix in the community that you founded the organization in?
Yep. So interesting enough, we founded Public Equity in 2020 in February. And as we all know, COVID hit, or the pandemic struck in like late February, early March. So initially, we just wanted to do violence prevention and interruption work in the community. But COVID made us rethink everything. And being out doing the work on the ground, we kind of saw all of the disparities in like healthcare and resources. So we had already come up with the concept of public equity, but that even made me want to even go further and go deeper into what we already kind of knew. But it also forced us to have a more holistic approach to the work that we're doing. So we started looking at the social determinants of health, which are environmental factors, food, nutrition, things of that nature. So that's kind of how it all came together.
Yeah. So those disparities you mentioned in healthcare that were the initial focus, what were some of the activities that you're doing to help fix that inequity?
Yeah, one of the first things I did, because I was at the time I was working in Inglewood, and in 2020, I mean that was one of our highest number in terms of violence and homicides, like on the records, like probably in the last 20 to 30 years. So one of the first things I did was create a one pager to debunk myths about COVID-19. I was around a lot of young people who were listening to like social media influencers and different people on the internet get them false information about COVID and even vaccinations. So my thing was to break it down, give them the information that they needed in the plainest and simplest terms, because I speak the language of the people, and then allow them to be able to make an informed decision. And it was highly effective. So even in doing that, um, we weren't necessarily promoting vaccines, but just again have the information. But a lot of people came to us, and we actually served as a vaccination site in Inglewood and Roseland, where we were able to get some people vaccinated.
Yeah. Now, there's also conversations out there about the differences between maybe government funded programs or even other organizations that are providing programs that that help with symptoms of violence prevention, for example, versus attack the causes. So have you seen that at all in the work that you're doing? And do you try to make a differentiation of like programming you do that helps with the symptoms versus the causes, and what might be more beneficial?
Well, as we all know, violence has been deemed as a public health crisis. It's like any other infectious disease. The thing is, public health work is preventive in nature, right? So we should always be thinking preventive. So one thing I did in my model, or the model that public equity has created, is kind of focus on more preventive measures versus interruption or intervention. Because a lot of times, by the time you try to intervene, it may be too late. You know what I mean? So it's
Yep.
better to eat that apple a day prior to going to the doctor, and the doctor saying you need to eat that apple a day, or else.
Yep. Yeah. How I think one of the reasons why we see a lot of organizations and programs focusing more on the intervention versus the prevention is it's a lot harder to measure, right? The prevention and the preventative aspects, because it's like you're preventing something from happening. So how could you make an argument for grants, for example, or for getting additional funding from government? So how have you guys navigated through that at Public Equity? Of if the focus is preventative, what are some of the data points that you could capture that you add to those grants, or you add to the conversations with the public leaders that you talked to a couple of days ago?
Well, you just answered my question. You said the key word, data, right?
Yep.
Data informs the work that we do. So we do a baseline assessment with all of our participants, and in this assessment, we capture information about not only them but their family, how they grew up, where they grew up, uh, things such as are you a smoker, a non-smoker? You know what I mean? All of
Yep.
these different things that could impact the way you feel about yourself and others. So we spend a lot of time gathering data, but not in the sense of like trying to make it like experimental. You know what I mean? But
Yep.
also, I'm very hands on, so I'm on the ground a lot too. So a lot of it is my own personal observation as well as other key staff members.
Yeah. Well, um, that's great. Now, going back, I guess, less comment on the data point. What are some of the more impactful data points that you're gathering, if you could share them, that people think are most important for being able to show the preventative impact that you guys are having? Is it like the overall, like you mentioned, the first 2020 was one of the highest record years in terms of violence?
Mhm.
Is it just taking that very macro data point and seeing if it changed over time based on the work you're doing, or there are a few more double clicks into that or more micro data points that you're trying to measure?
Yeah. So it's definitely that. And these are really good questions, by the way, too.
Sorry.
So it's definitely that, right? Because we have had saw a decrease since 2020 in the city of Chicago overall, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, some things are very hard to quantify.
Yeah.
So those are the things that we focus on. So, for example, the traditional gang structure in Chicago no longer exists. It's block by block, it's cliques and crews, and the violence is more transient. So you got guys who may come from Englewood that may be clicked up with guys from Auburn Gresham, which is a neighboring community, and they may be clicked up with some guys from Roseland. So for us, we try to even track and measure that, because if we conduct a conflict mediation between two groups, there are probably another 10 to 20 parties involved. So we're actually preventing the spread in that way, but we're figuring out more creative ways to quantify that data as well, because that's important.
Yeah. Well, conflict mediation you mentioned. Now, this is something that one of the reasons why I was excited to talk to you about this, because some of these conflict mediation activities that I'm sure Public Equity does and other organizations that we've interviewed have done in their sort of justice space are probably similar. But what are some of the conflict mediation activities that you and your organization uh, does as part of your programming?
Well, it's gonna sound a little weird when I say this, but I think it's no one way to
Mm,
perform a conflict mediation.
yeah.
You just never know. Sometimes it could be as simple as somebody, even us, just paying off a simple debt for somebody that they couldn't afford to pay off, and it could potentially save somebody's life. But also, I like to always kind of come bearing gifts, and what I mean by that is, if I'm asking you to stop doing something, I need to replace it with something more positive and productive. So recently, in the last 2 months, we conducted a huge mediation. Um, and what we did was offer both parties or both sides job
Wow.
opportunities.
Yeah.
Uh, and we even also open the space for them to even try to create out their own programming and entrepreneurial concepts that we could potentially support in the near future if they can continue this peace arrangement. So it's not a one size fits all policy.
Yeah.
It varies. It depends on what the ask is because it's a negotiation process, like anything. Like in any war, you're going to have like a negotiation process. We need this. This is our ask. So we kind of we listen to both sides, or if it's multiple parties involved, we listening to everybody. Then we kind of come together as a staff and a team and conclude what makes the most sense and kind of work from there.
Yeah. I've never heard that as a as a conflict mediation negotiation, having jobs as a part of it. Where did that idea come from, and how has it resulted to this point? Because that's such an interesting um, idea.
Well, to be honest with you, most, and I don't want to say most, I have to be very careful with my
Yep.
words. It was a time I'll be 44. So the street economy was really booming in terms of people like making money. Um, it's shifted a lot now. It's more about violence, right? So I think if there's any opportunity for somebody to make some money specifically in a legitimate manner, they're gonna be okay with it, right? And even with the work, even with the job opportunities that we offered them, it gave them an opportunity to almost be like peacekeepers and like custodians of their community. So it just makes sense.
Mm.
And for me, it's like we need to take baby steps because some people may be deemed unemployable by society, right? We don't believe that. We just believe that again, it's all about that equity. So we want to work with them and meet them where they are. So this is a good opportunity to kind of get them trained up to be able to go into the regular workforce if they want to.
I feel like we went on a good tangent there, but kind of going back to the programming of public equity,
Mhm.
we shared about the history and how the initial focus was on a lot of the healthcare disparities. Um, Currently, how has that evolved? So, current state, what are some of the main programs and focuses that you're having as an organization and as a leader of public equity?
Yeah, it's still even more prevalent now than it was in 2020 when COVID hit. Reason being, again, I think I said it kind of earlier in this interview. We need to focus more on the social determinants of health. Violence is just a byproduct of everything else. And if we just continue to focus on that, then we're gonna miss the mark. But also if we're trying to be preventive in nature, then we need to do what? Go younger. So that's been one of our focuses. But also, again, in this holistic approach, we need to be working with the entire family because that dynamic is affected just as much as the shooter and the victim. You know what I mean? So even thinking about vicarious trauma, I've seen instances where a 5-year-old girl was looking out the window and saw somebody murdered, with two people murdered in like a year's time, and nobody was really working with that young lady and her family.
Mm.
But also, if we really want to be effective and really reach um, the young men that are most, and I hate this term, at risk, or I'll say vulnerable to violence, we need to work with their families because these are the people that they love. So this gives me even a closer relationship to you if you're incarcerated, or even if you deny all of our services. If I'm working with your kid, your baby mother, your grandmother, your mother, it's gonna soften your heart a little bit, and you're gonna be like, you know what, public equity ain't so bad, man. Or they asked me to do something, I need to kind of comply because they did look out for my baby mother and my daughter.
Yeah. Wow. So you've given a couple examples so far of the addressing and working at the source, younger. The example of the jobs, which is that I feel like that could change a lot, right? The trajectory in people's lives, like you mentioned. What would you say are another common programming or activities that you're doing, maybe even focusing on youth, to set and change maybe trajectories or to set a better foundation for kind of minimizing the reoccurrence of of violence in this example.
Mental health. I think that's extremely important. I'm a huge proponent of mental health. I go to therapy myself, and I'm a firm believer that I can't ask you to do something that I'm not willing to do. That's an old street mantra. Don't ask me to do something you ain't gonna do with me. You know what I mean? So even with my team, we incorporate CBI, which is cognitive behavioral intervention, and it kind of introduces our participants to the mental health space because we have to destigmatize it, because in most black and brown communities, we feel like I'm good, ain't nothing wrong with me. and then we go out and we may self-medicate, or we may find other ways to, deflect from what's really going on. But it's even worse than what we started. You know what I mean? It leaves us in a worse situation as opposed to where we started. So I'm a big proponent of mental health. We do have two therapists on staff. And because we promote it so much as a team, but also a lot of people on my staff are actually huge proponents of therapy, and they go to therapy as well. It's kind of easy to sell, for lack of a better word.
Mm.
Um, but you have to find creative ways to kind of put the medicine in the candy. So one thing that I started off doing, I would go to some of the worst blocks in the community, and I would say, okay, let's do a cooking challenge. I challenge you to cook a healthy meal in under 15 minutes. So
Mm.
I would lay out portable hot plates, tables, all the utensils and everything that they needed. And we would bring in like boneless, skinless chicken breasts and broccoli and stuff like that, right? Because food and stuff like that make people kind of vulnerable. So now I got you a little vulnerable. You're a little, you kind of weak in this moment. I'm gonna use this opportunity to start talking about thoughts, feelings, and emotions, which is a part of the cognitive behavioral process. And in doing that, um, people were just really receptive. Because again, it's like you got we you gotta meet people where they are. You know what I mean? So just always trying to find innovative ways to introduce these mental health concepts, to my community.
Yeah, I can imagine mental health is one of the cores of something that needs to be addressed, because you said it yourself at the beginning of the interview that you kind of realized and have seen people start to become desensitized by people dying in front of them, um, and I think news outlets play a part in that. Not saying it's bad or good, but it's there's just a lot. Negative news sells more than positive news, right? That's the
Absolutely.
unfortunate truth. And so I feel like what we're seeing a lot in the news is just all the negative aspects versus, people and organizations that are doing amazing work in the communities being raised up at twice as much as the negative aspects. Um, so the desensitization, I think, is more prevalent now in the advent of social media just booming. How has your organization, or how do you address that? How do you resensitize people to seeing that what's happening in front of them is like wrong and bad, and it's traumatic, and it's something that needs to be addressed and seek help and talk about. And I know we've talked about some of these things, but I'm wondering if there's any silver bullets for resensitizing people to what's going on.
Yeah, I like that term, resensitizing. First you have to be water. You have to be flexible and adaptable, right? Because you said something. So initially, or I'll say maybe in the past 15 to 20 years, we've seen the advent of like social media really promote violence, right? Prior to that, people were outside on blocks. So this is the new block now. You know
Yep.
what I mean? So we had to adapt and adjust. And we monitor social media. And I don't want to say that like in terms of like no police activity, because it's not
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
but it's just that we're really in tune with what's going on. And when I say we, I mean my team. It keeps us connected, because I've seen posts that could be detrimental to the community. In terms of like people getting into it and having a potential violent conflict, and it allowed me time to reach out to both parties and even tell one party, "Hey, you need to take
Jeez.
that down. We need to fix that." And it was like conversations that were had on the back end, and it was able to be rectified. Um, I think as far as like, as you said, resensitizing people, I've been a part of quite a few campaigns throughout my tenure in doing this work, where we promoted like pro-social behavior through social media. But it can't be corny, right? Because you still have to meet people where they are.
Yep.
So I was working with a social media influencer in 2018 by the name of Zach TV1. Zach TV1, if you're not familiar with him, had a huge platform. He broke most of the Chicago rappers in the city, and he was like a little brother to me, and he was my mentee. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He was killed by gun violence in 2018, I believe. So actually, we started in 2017. So one thing that we were doing, we promoted, for example, a rap battle. And in the rap battle, because this platform was so huge, and most of these groups have a rapper attached to them, right? So we know this. So in the rap battle, you had to talk about the negative things in your community and how you wanted to see them change, or how you could change them. And we initially just wanted to work within the Roseland community, And we ended up getting so many submissions that we made it a citywide initiative, and we were able to secure some funding to get guys studio
Wow.
time, to pay for their video to be recorded. And it was a number of a few other things that came along with that. So that was one thing. But even now, I'm working with my team diligently to come up with another way to combat some of the social media negativity that we see every day. But again, it has to be culturally relevant, because if I'm a 16-year-old, I don't want to hear the after school message that they used to play on WGN back in the day. You know what I mean? It's cool, and we have to figure out ways to make peace cool. And that's the beauty of this community violence intervention profession, because everybody that does this work on the ground, boots on the ground work, they come from the community. They have a voice in the community, meaning they will once people on the other side of the fence, and people still respect them. So if,
Mm.
if they're promoting the message of peace being cool, it
Yeah.
means a lot, because they were once in the shoes of the perpetrator.
Yep. Well, well, we're already 21 minutes in, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about the future of public equity. So, before we hit record, you were talking about a recent trip that you just got back from. I'd love to hear about it, and what are some of the future plans of public equity?
Yep. So I took a trip to Springfield, Illinois yesterday, the state's capital. Yesterday was the budget hearing by our governor, Pritzker. So I went to advocate for community violence intervention. And what that means or look like is I was actually having conversations with some of our state reps and senators. Some are familiar with the work and they strongly support it. But I went yesterday to talk to some of those who may have adverse opinions about some of the work that we're doing. But
Mm.
once you get in front of them, because I'm a testimonial, you know what I mean? So I went to have those conversations and to advocate, but also just to show solidarity with some other people who do the same work in other communities,
Mm.
to let the people of the politicians in Springfield know that, hey, we're here because policy impacts everything, right? And we want to have a voice in the political process. Growing up, I always thought politicians were scumbags, slime balls, and I'm like, I'd never participate in the political process because I don't think people care about us enough to even acknowledge
Mm.
our voice. But as I've evolved, I understand that our votes do matter. And not all politicians are bad people. They're human beings, and actually they work for us. So we need to hold them accountable. But also, if they don't know what our issues are, then we can't complain when they
Yeah.
don't address them. You understand
Hmm.
what I'm saying?
Yep.
So
100%.
I'm learning more to become more politically astute, and I take trips to Springfield often. I'm actually, interesting enough, tomorrow I'm testifying before a Senate hearing committee. Um, yeah, and the whole purpose of that is we're trying to come up with a program to get this bill passed, where we can get people that do community violence intervention work credentialed almost enough to be social workers in their community, and create a workforce around that without them actually having to go back to school until they can actually get a degree, if that makes
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
sense. Yep.
Wow. And what would that, if that were to get passed, what would that mean for the work that they're doing in the community?
It means everything, because one thing for sure, none of us are getting younger. I got a lot of gray on my beard, as you can see. And over time, we want to evolve out of these positions and allow other people to come behind us. To be honest with you, I want to put violence prevention out of business, right? I
Mm.
want to do this work so effectively that I got to go figure out something else to do, right?
Mm.
So
Right.
that's one thing. But in addition to that, I think being a violence interrupter or a violence prevention specialist, it's a shelf life, right? And I wanted, when I thought about public equity and we created this model, I want public equity to serve as a community institution. And what I mean by that is I want it to be revolving doors for people to come in and have opportunities and jobs. So I don't want my outreach team or even myself to hold on to these positions for dear life. I think it's highly important that, you know we evolve and grow in this work. We can still be attached to it in some shape, form, or fashion, but some of us need to be in Springfield becoming lobbyists. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some of us need to become mental health professionals. I'm in school right now to become a social worker, so I'm in the process of getting my bachelor's in social work, and then I'm gonna go on to get my master's in public health. But that's the goal, to evolve and allow other people to come in and take over, because it's always young people's time.
Yeah. Well, the next question is usually the future as well. What do you hope it looks like 10 years from now, 15 years from now? But I think you answered it. Violence prevention going out of business.
Yeah, that's the goal.
um,
That's the goal.
yeah.
So right now, just to give you some data and some facts, we are only targeting 25% of the population that's deemed as vulnerable or high risk. The goal is to work with 75% of that population at least, right? So if we're diligently doing this work, and when I say we, I speak loosely, but I'm speaking of every violence prevention org in the city, and
Yep.
it's a lot of us, north, east, south, and west side. If we're diligently doing this work, I really believe that we can hit that number and actually exceed those expectations. So yeah, that is the goal to, kind of put violence prevention out of business and really start focusing more on community health.
Yep. And that 25% number that you shared, is that just due to the amount of resources available? So if you were to quadruple the amount of resources, you'd get to 100%, or, times it by three, you get to 75.
Absolutely. The more
Yep.
you scale it, the more likely you are, the more you scale the work, the more likely you are to hit that number. So you have
Yep.
to understand, like when this whole violence prevention concept was initiated, and this was like with the ceasefire model, early 2000s. Their fiscal year ended like in June, the end of June. So we know that violence spikes in the summer months, right? So it wasn't sustainable at the time. But
Right.
now we got buy-in not only from the state, the city, the county, and a few, pastoral entities, but also the private sector, the business community. So all of this matters because again, we are first responders. We're no different than the paramedic or the fire department or the ambulance worker that shows up to the scene to respond to a shooting. So this is needed, and who better to do it than people who have the lived and shared experience?
Yeah. In Springfield, you mentioned that it gave you an opportunity to talk to people that were a little adverse to what you guys are trying to get through. Is that more so the adverse to having funds allocated by Pritzker to this cause versus police, for example? So is it more of like an adversity of how they feel that money can impact violence prevention versus being put elsewhere? Is that kind of the main aspect?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's a mixture of both. But again, if people don't know, then they're just going to make their own decisions. That's what anybody. It's human nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we invite people to come out to the community and see what's going on and see the work up close and personal. But also, when we go to talk to these people, we have data to support what we're saying. So it's not like I'm coming down there just trying to sell them on some feel good stuff like, hey, we need this money,
Yeah. Yep.
because I feel this way. No, it's like, here are the facts, here's the data to support, what we're pushing and promoting. And I'm gonna be honest, in most instances, once they hear and understand what it is we're trying to accomplish, most of them are bought in, at least the ones that I've spoken with,
Yep.
for the most part. Yep.
Wow. Well, this is amazing. We've covered a lot in 28 minutes already. Engagement. People that are listening and inspired and want to support, what type of engagement do you look for?
Good question. So financial,
Yep.
um, definitely volunteer based support as well. Spring and summer is coming, approaching us fast, so we'll be doing a lot of community events, which whoever is tuning in can actually find on our website because we'll post like a list of our summer community calendar. So we're always looking for that type of support, but also so anybody that learn anything from this interview, just to promote the message about violence prevention work and kind of spread that awareness because there's a lot of stigma surrounding the work. For some people, it's just a bunch of ex felons and ex criminals out kind of shielding themselves behind this work, which is not the case at all. There are some very sincere people committed to changing the narrative in our communities and preventing violence. So it needs to be highlighted more because, as you said, we need to resensitize people. It's not just social media, it's the traditional media as well. You rarely see anything about us on the news.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when something bad happens, you always see that. But a lot of this stuff, people like us, public equity, and other groups throughout the city, we're mediating some of these conflicts, and you don't hear much about that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, is there anything we missed or anything you want to leave us with before we wrap up here, this interview?
No, I think we talked about a lot. I would love
Yeah.
to come back again if you have me back. And I think this was good.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, thank you so much, Tony, for your time. People that are listening will share all of the social media links and website links and donation links for you to learn more and continue this education and awareness, and hopefully you can engage however you feel inspired to be engaged.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, Tony, nice, love it,
Good.
love it, public equity. So
Absolutely.
great, Tony. Thank you again so much for your time. Really appreciate it. The work you're doing is really amazing, and me being hometown in Chicago is close to my heart. So thank you, amazing work, and we're honored to share the work that you're doing.
Yep. Thank you for having me. Appreciate you all.
Thank you.